So, I want to address a specific perspective that can come up sometimes when you start to get into non duality and realize the truth of no self. And if this doesn't seem to be something that you have dealt with at all, then just disregard this and don't think it's a necessary perspective or stage that you have to go through or anything like that. We all have our own unique journeys because we've all had our own unique misunderstandings and unique ways in which we've always understood this. I really have observed this. And that's kind of what makes everybody already enlightened. As you interact with people more and more, you start to see and appreciate these kind of like beautiful things about them, and like perspectives, certain flawed perspectives that they've never actually taken on, that they've always kind of been immune to and kind of been connected to source in their own way. And it's kind of funny because there's something unique to appreciate in everyone. And so, like, there's a lot of misunderstandings that we make collectively. And there's sort of like, you could almost say that we have collective shadows, but everybody's trying to go about healing those in different ways. And this is what kind of like creates a lot of the issues and problems in our lives, is that we are trying to go about healing something without really understanding what it is that we want to heal and what it is that we actually are, because healing essentially is realizing the fact that we're already whole. So there's a book I read. I won't mention what book it was. And I read it shortly after going through the awakening and having like all kinds of mind-opening perspectives that all of a sudden I could understand, and I could see a greater truth in things and like everywhere. It was showing up everywhere. But then there was some kind of back and forth where I would start to doubt. And one of the biggest examples of this happening was when I read a book that talked about how Charles Manson was awake. And like always in my childhood, I'd heard of him, and my mother had absolute complete disgust for him. But if you look up his quotes, they're very non-dual. They're very awake. And yet there was so much chaos and horror and destruction, and then the questions of responsibility that came about from that. So it was always, at the time, I was just so disturbed by it, and so disturbed that these recent revelations that I'd had so matched up with things that he was saying. And this sounds totally crazy, but it's another thing that you'll become aware of, is that certain religious pointers, you start to see like the double meanings in them and the truth in them, in a way you haven't before. It's sort of a effect of your mind opening and your mind like not running off an old paradigm anymore. So you start to recognize wisdom in things. All of a sudden, Alice in Wonderland makes sense. It's not just this delightful nonsense for kids. There's really deep meanings in it. And a lot of like unintentional nonsense, you start to realize that it wasn't actually unintentional. Like, for example, there was a password that I came up with, and I was randomly coming up with a combination of letters and numbers that I could remember. And so it was like a nonsensical saying, but it was like saying something. And I realized, like, after the fact, what a crazy non-dual pointer it was. And I was not intentionally trying to do that. So we're always we're channeling things. And the perspective that this is very creepy, or that there's some sort of like evil force going on behind this, can come up. And depending on our religious upbringing, we can attribute it to a number of different things. And the reality is that Source is good with a capital G. You're the author of the story, and so at the same time, there is good. Love wins. Good wins out. And the villains are still the villains, and the good guys are still the good guys, but they never existed anyway. So it's not that you suddenly become a character that can use this understanding to become a more powerful character that works for bad, because bad is better than good. The author's intention for good kind of still stands, but saying this is too much, although it may resolve a conflict between morality, that morality is still there. And at the same time, it's not, and that's where your power is, and the realizing that you're the author, realizing that you're not, realizing that your perspective as a character holds and yet is totally in flux, which is what creates the possibility of transformation in the first place. So Charles Manson was demonized all my life. Marilyn Manson was demonized all my life. And I mentioned in a video last year, like this time last year, how I like started listening to his music and started looking into that. And he was raised in a Catholic school. And you start to see how collective shadows and like these famous figures almost come out to show us our collective shadows. So if you look into Charles Manson's story, he was incarcerated for a very, very long time. He never really had a mother, never really had a home, never really had parents, and so he created a family for himself. And he has a quote about how, like, the prison is your mind. And there's so much, like, deep, sharp truth behind what he's saying. And the irony, almost as if somebody wrote this, and sorry if this creeps you out more than because it's intending to like heal, but the irony is that his name is Charles, which means free man, and Manson, man's son, and he like noted the similarity between the Son of Man and Jesus Christ, and it's almost like he's a child that collective society decided to demonize, and so they truly created something to demonize and kept demonizing it, not seeing like the pointers there within his name, that he was almost like a son that the prison system and society's understanding just was culminated in this unfortunate like collective karma. And so I kept, ever since I'd realized that he was awake, that he was like understanding the same things that I was beginning to understand. I felt as if I didn't want to be associated with him. I had that same kind of identity, which was like, I'm like him, but I'm not him. Which is how identity works. It's like a confusion, like we're the same, but we're different. It's so interesting how that works. But once you see how love just is the underlying basis of everything, already, you see how we create these misunderstandings. And two kids' books come to mind that are like incredible pointers. And again, I bet the authors just wrote them because they were inspired to do so. But one of them is The Gruffalo, where the mouse, like feeling the victim of all these other predators in the woods, creates a story of the Gruffalo in order to scare the other creatures, and it actually works. But then he runs into the actual Gruffalo, and he goes back through and shows the Gruffalo how he's gotten all these other creatures to be afraid of him, and then the Gruffalo leaves him alone. How we create our own monsters in order to protect ourselves. And then the book, I think there's a monster at the end of this book, and it's a Grover book. I think it's by John Stone. And I never had it as a kid, but I've read it to my kids. And Grover, like from the title, he's like, there's a monster at the end of this book, and he goes through this crazy like set of things where he tries to like nail the pages together and build a brick wall. And of course, like kids, because he's trying to get the kid not to turn the page, and so it sort of like breaks that fourth wall or whatever, third wall, and the kid is like trying to is just like thrilled with this. And then at the end of the book, he realizes that he's the monster. And so that's kind of what waking up to the no self and the no author and the no one at fault is. You realize, man, that the misunderstandings cause a whole lot of mess. But that you are the monster at the end of the book, and it's pretty hilarious. So I've done a lot of like shadow work in the past and like kind of cleaned up misunderstandings. But it's funny to like hit upon a collective misunderstanding. And I'm not going to say that like Charles Manson was good, but it sure as heck can destroy your spiritual ego when you realize that this understanding is everywhere. Like nobody has this. Like Jim Newman says, nobody gets this. You randomly, when you're coming up with a password, have it, or like my socks say no nonsense. It's prior to the understanding of it, and so everybody already understands it on some. You already understand. You already get it. You're the author and the monster at the end of the book. One of the things that I've realized is that you cannot get there from here from the perspective of I am bad. I think that's exactly how I ended my last video. And so often someone gives us like a sharp, clear pointer. But if we take it from the perspective that I'm bad and so therefore I need to correct this, it will be completely missed. And yet, like, there is an incredible kind of like purification to good that happens when we realize that there is no conflict between feeling good, not acting out of fear to try to secure a feeling good in the future, but actually in this moment feeling good and doing good, that could actually be our guidance, that God or source could actually be that good, as to have given us such clear feeling guidance that what truly feels good to us is good. And the mind will take and own this and make all sorts of conflicts with it and say that eating a Big Mac and a ton of sugar feels good. But when you're actually aware, it doesn't. Lying to someone does not feel good. Like, being free to tell the truth, that kind of freedom is worth sacrificing everything for, to say what you mean and mean what you say.